Welcome to Elemental Whispers, a podcast dedicated to creating pathways of remembrance through the sharing of personal experiences and real-life sacred stories of working with the community of otherworld beings for healing, growth, and joyful enchantment. I'm Diamira Rose D'Agostino, and this is my gift to you. A podcast that is really meant to be a doorway. May it illuminate this pathway of magical remembrance. May its medicine of enchantment guide you in your elemental journey of soul, earth, and spirit. I've just come in from gardening. I've had a most initiatory experience in the garden today when I pruned and trained my roses for the first time. Before I share with you about the roses, I want to let you know that this episode is the season finale and going to be the last episode of the season while I take a break, while I take stock, while I see what the second season wants to look like, and also when I want to start it. And in this interim, you have an opportunity to leave me a review, which I would be ever so grateful for. So many of you have written to me about how some of the episodes have impacted you. If you literally just take some of that, you could copy and paste it into a review, it would be really, really appreciated. So this podcast is not ending, but I do need this break. And so much is ending. As you know, I completed Elemental Whispers Essence line. Thank you to everyone who wrote me a message letting me know your support, your love, your gratitude for the essences. As I complete different pieces of my work, I am also just taking a look and seeing what's left and where my focus is. So, the roses. The story of the roses is really set within a greater context of my journey with gardening. And first and foremost, I have to say that many people assume that I am an excellent gardener. And this assumption, I imagine, comes from people knowing what I do for my work, which is that I have devoted my life in service to the earth, in service to supporting the healing and reconciliation of our relationship with the spiritual realms of Gaia's sacred ecosphere, and healing our wound and belief of separation between us and the sacred, seen and unseen beings, energies, spirits, and realms that are part of life on earth. So because of that, many people assume that I am a great gardener. They assume that because I can communicate with the spirits of nature, with the devas and nature spirits, with the elemental kingdom, with fairy, that I would be able to plant things well and I would be just so joyful about it. And I can assure you that nothing is further from the truth. Now, what I want to say is that even though I do not enjoy gardening, even though I am not a good gardener, does not mean I do not have a great respect for the garden, for gardeners, for the whole process. I have an exquisite respect, and I love gardens. I said I didn't like gardening, but I love gardens. And my love of gardens was cultivated and nurtured from the time I was a little girl. Some of my happiest memories are with my mother hopping around our tiny little garden. I grew up in inner city Chicago. In the city, we, of course, we're very close to neighbors on either side. There's just a tiny little sliver of what we call the gangway in between separating homes. We would share a chain link fence with the neighbors, and that separated our yards, and then backed up to an alleyway where cars could drive through. And some houses had garages and whatnot. And so this was just this tiniest plot of backyard, and yet it was my mom's pride and joy, and it was such a magical playground for me. The whole left side of it was shaded by a huge mature crabapple tree. I would gather the crabapples that fell, and I learned very early on that they were quite sour. And at some point, I set out on a great endeavor to collect them and try to make jam, which neither my mother nor my grandmother really had the skill set of preservation. They were city folk. So the crabapple tree was a huge sacred memory of mine. And on the other half of the yard, we at some point got an above ground pool. A blight upon the eye, but as a child, I of course loved it. So every year my mom would plant all these flowers in the garden, annuals and vegetables, and I would hop around with this watering can and water them, thinking that I was really, doing something. And it was just very fun, very sweet. So we had all these annuals, and yet it was some of these perennials that came up every year that just have, even to this day, such sacred places in my heart memory. So the crabapple was one, and there was a mulberry tree and honeysuckle shrubs that blocked the view of the alleyway. In the gangway, we had a lilac shrub, and even now, that scent brings me back to childhood. We had a swath of lily of the valley right next to the lilac shrub. And then along the side that bordered one of our neighbors, we had a peony plant and a rose bush. So we had this lone rose bush. And to me, this rose was the greatest rose in the whole world. This rose was what I later learned in life was the color of magenta. But growing up as a little girl, I called her my red rose. To me, this was what a red rose looked like. I didn't even know that there was a rose that was actually blood red until much later. And so this rose, I don't even remember it having a scent. I think it was one of those hybrid tea roses. And what's so interesting is that I don't think my mom even planted it. My mom doesn't like roses. She complains that they're too fussy, and so I don't think she would have planted it. My grandma, on the other hand, loves roses. She loved roses, and she always lived upstairs. So we had this 2-story house. It was one apartment below and one apartment above, and my grandma lived in the one above. And on her cocktail table in the front room, which is what most people call a living room, that's Chicago speak, was a little knickknack, this glass encased artificial rose. And it was the same color as the rose bush. So it was this single rose blossom inside this glass cube. I love to walk around with it and play with it. And I don't know why my grandma had it, except for I seem to think it was either her mother's or it reminded her of her mom. And that is because my great-grandmother, her name was Rose. So that is who I'm named after. It is my middle name. And this was how my feelings around a garden were nurtured, were begun. So fast forward to present day, more or less. And when we moved here in the spring of 2017, one of the first plants I noticed that had been planted in this elevated garden box was a rose. And it was the same color as the rose of my childhood. So there was this linking of rose to rose. There was a linking, a calling back and a calling forward from my childhood and that memory of gardening and the magic and the beauty and all of the delight that a garden brought to me. And when we moved here, my first endeavor was to work on those garden beds. And at the beginning, my mom visited and helped me. We got some plants planted. But I'm going to fast forward us to the journey of the main garden, the New Avalon Temple Garden, which is the newest installation. The design for it began in mid 2019. I went in the direction of wanting to create this permaculture principled installation. Part of the permaculture experience is, first of all, working with the natural flows and energy systems of the land. That's first. So you observe the land and you see, okay, how is the land naturally working? Where are the water flows? Where is there erosion? Where is the wind hitting? Where is the sun hit? What are the animals like? And it's about working with those energy systems, leveraging them in order to create a living ecosystem that has all these inputs and feeds itself and then creates this beautiful, harmonious system of abundance for not just the humans, but also for the animals, the pollinators. And for me, it was also really important to create a living sanctuary for the spirits of this place and the spirits of New Avalon. So we created the New Avalon Garden, which we wanted to create it with a lot of these principles in mind. And we really had no idea what we were doing. There are so many quote unquote mistakes I made that set me back so far, so many plants I've lost, because one of the big challenges that we have is we have a lot of deer and we have rabbits and raccoons and bear. When you wake up and half the things you planted are completely annihilated by the deer, it's actually quite devastating. How I came to get roses was that I began to make lists of plants that was so important to me to have. And it wasn't just a matter of food, but it was also looking at these other important factors. Are they going to serve the pollinators? Maybe I have beautiful flowers that are really just supporting the butterflies and the bees, and they're not food or herbs. Maybe there's other plants that I have a deep relationship with, a medicine relationship with. For example, meadowsweet, free nettle. So I chose plants that I wanted to plant very specifically in some cases. In other cases, I would be walking through a garden center and they would call to me, or I would be scanning a list and I would feel some energy when I got to a certain name of a plant, even not knowing what that plant is. Some of the plants that I want so badly just have not worked out. Some of them took me 3 or 4 times to plant over and over again and finally get established. Now, because of my connection with the rose, I desired to be a tender of roses. One thing to note about both the childhood rose and the current rose in the rose box is that they do not have a scent. That iconic scent, the heady perfume of heaven that roses have. I did not experience a real growing rose having that scent until probably my adult years. I learned so many of the flowers that are sold in nurseries and garden centers have been so hybridized and so cultivated that a lot of them, the scent has been cultivated right out of them. I feel the scent is half, if not more, of the beauty of the rose. I was told once long ago by a distributor of supplements. She worked for one of the big supplement companies. Apparently, the person who started this supplement company was a meditator. And what they learned and discovered through meditation was that roses, the scent of roses, actually will entrain you to the frequency of love. The same frequency that if you were to measure on the frequency scale, a vibration of falling in love, that frequency is, according to this person, was the same as the frequency that we move into when we smell a rose. I don't know if that's true, but I'd like to think it is. Roses are so magical. So much of the medicine of rose is the scent. And I mean that like when we use rose in a medicinal way, when we're working with rose petals and teas, they have to have the scent. Otherwise, they don't have the medicine. And The roses that they use for medicine are the Rosa centifolia, Rosa rugosa, and Rosa damascena, right? The damask rose. The centifolia rose is the cabbage rose, and the Rosa rugosa is that 5-petaled rose that is probably the closest connected rose to the wild rose. And it's that quintessential 5-petal connected to Venus, connected to the 5 elements, connected to the heart, like that sweet, simple rose. So I knew that I wanted, as part of my garden experience, scented roses. Not only did I want scented roses, but I wanted to connect with the ancient roses, the roses that were potentially in my great-grandmother's gardens, potentially in some of my great-grandparents' gardens, maybe in Europe. And what were those roses? When I went to local garden centers, those were not the roses that were available. I discovered this place called Heirloom Roses. You can order roses from their store online, and they have roses, some of which have been around since early 1800s, and you can get these older roses. And what I love is that they're not grafted. They are own root roses. And grafted roses mean that you graft it on. So whatever rose you're trying to grow, you would graft it onto the rootstock of any other rose. Whereas own root roses, they only are the actual rootstock of that rose. So when the canes shoot up, they're always going to be from that species of rose that you purchased. So anyways, I went on this whole hunt and eventually selected 4 roses. I chose a pink damask rose, an heirloom rose from the 1800s. It's a rambling climbing rose, and they're white, and those are the 5 petals. And then I chose 2 similar to Rosa rugosa. I think they also call them the apothecary rose. I chose a white one and a pink one. So we planted these roses 2 or 3 years ago. The white rose rambler, or climbing rose, went just like 5 feet past the garden entrance, where there's a pergola or arch. The climbers are the ones that I was working with today. So these white roses, I'll just call them the climbing roses, they have taken off in terms of it's this huge profusion of canes that have just shot up and all of these continuous blooms. And as you walk through the garden, if the wind blows, you can smell the perfume of these roses. I drop into heaven every time I go by them. And a couple of things I noticed, year 2 or 3, I'm like, it's very interesting. These roses aren't actually growing around this pergola amount. Well, 5 or 6 or 10 videos later, and I realized you have to train the roses. I had no idea that the rambling roses and the climbers, I thought that they would just climb like vines do. You know, you might have to train them a little bit. If they get off track, you just weave something in. But I just thought that they would grow up like vines on their own. That is not the case. So hence why today was an initiatory experience for me. The other thing that is important with roses, and I know this from my magenta rose that I had when we moved in, is the roses can get certain fungal infections. So when you prune the roses, ideally, not only will you collect all of the leaf litter and bag it up rather than compost it, but also you want to really sterilize your pruning shears before you use them, and then before you use them again on a different plant. So not in general for the whole garden, but for roses in particular. So that's what I was doing today. I pruned my rose for the first time, and it was kind of scary. Of course, I was working with the spirit of the rose in partnership with her, and I will be giving her essences that support her in this transition and to support her energy field and her stabilization. So that will all be part of the process. But then I trained the rose for the first time. And you actually have to pull the canes and train them in the way that you want them and then use ties to tie them up. So that was what I was doing today. So as I was doing all of the things, one of the very things that I struggle with appeared just as I was cleaning up the leaf litter. And that was that a millipede encroached on my experience. Now, for those of you who have read my book, Initiation, My Fairy Soul Awakening, and if we have time, I'm going to read a little excerpt at the end here. You know that part of what catalyzed a deepening of my healing experience and then what led to knowing who I was at a soul level was this tremendous phobia that I have of millipedes and centipedes. One of the reasons that I am garden challenged is because I still am very nervous system derailed when I encounter millipedes and centipedes up close and personal. I don't even like to actually see images of them. In addition to that, I actually have weird allergic reactions to stuff. I get terrorized by mosquitoes, chiggers, and those no-see-ums are so not my friend. I oftentimes joke that I'm everybody else's citronella candle because the bugs will come and bite me. And so they leave everybody else alone. So between that and then my fear of millipedes and centipedes, gardening is just unjoyful and difficult and a challenge. And it's like some people find gardening as this like beautiful, therapeutic, act of peace. No, for me, it's like, okay, just get in there and do it, but I really have to psych myself up to do it. And oftentimes it ends in disaster for any number of reasons. So last year, I came to a place of acceptance with myself in terms of my inability to garden. The fact that I probably won't ever be a great gardener. The fact that I don't actually have to be a gardener. Like not being a gardener doesn't mean anything. If I don't like to garden, I am the only one who assigns a meaning to that. It doesn't have to mean anything about me not being good enough or not being worthy of having a garden. So all of this was part of what I had to really look at last year. I saw how I was forcing myself into a state of suffering, ongoing suffering regularly because I was telling myself I had to do these things. I had to go out there, even though every time my nervous system would be activated, I would be so upset because I had seen something or I'd gotten bitten by something and would have some sort of allergic response for days. But I had to come to my own place of peace and acceptance with myself and with the fact that it's okay that I don't garden. And I want gardens. I want not just the gardens of my childhood, but gardens that remind me of the English cottage gardens and hanging gardens of Babylon. I'm all for it. So I want gardens. And yet I've come to this place of peace that it's okay that I'm not a gardener. And so last year when I came to this really powerful moment of acceptance, I gave myself permission to fully step into who I am in relationship to the garden. And the way that I was being shown it, the Queen of Pentacles was coming forward a lot. And if you've seen her card, she is sitting in these great gardens, right? And what I was being reflected and what my own soul was trying to communicate to me is that one of my gifts is as a visionary to really hold great overarching umbrella visions of big, big, big dreams. And I I can see 100 steps down the way. And then part of my work is, okay, how do I now break out the steps of that to extrapolate back so that I can get myself to that vision? And so I allowed myself to totally commune and claim this gift of me being a visionary. And that was the archetype of queen. It was like the queen of the garden. She who is like in her sovereign place of power and holding the vision of the garden. The queen, and I'm talking about in a very archetypal sense, the queen looks out over the kingdom and asks herself, what needs to be nurtured? How does this kingdom need to be stewarded and nurtured? And then she can see about it. But she's not the one that necessarily goes out and provides the nurturing to every single person in the kingdom, right? She just can see as the overarching principle what needs nurtured, who needs nurturing, how does this vision need to be fed. And so when I allowed myself to step into that role of queen and release gardener, I freed myself. I freed myself so fully. And it was then that I gave myself full permission to hire a gardener. And that position, I call it the gardening angel. And it's so beautiful because so much of the energy and resources that my business creates and brings in is then funneled and flowed to the New Avalon lands and garden. A lot of the money that I make in my business, I'm then able to direct and channel that to support these lands and how I'm stewarding these lands. And it just is this beautiful circuitry, because for those of you who have worked with me, you know that New Avalon is this beautiful container template that actually holds a lot of my courses, a lot of my programs, a lot of my containers. When I'm working with people, it is not only sourced from the energetic and love of this land, but also from the beautiful vortex of healing that is co-created by the spirits that have come together here in relational exploration to serve and support the dream vision of Gaia's new earth consciousness. Just this beautiful circuitry. And so in hiring support, I can now hold the vision and then offer and direct my vision and have support that helps carry out and implement my vision. I'm in such gratitude for this great honor to not just be able to finally channel some resources to this, but also that I am able to be a steward in this way. So that has been a huge part of my gardening journey. And what I have found is that as I have freed myself, both from my own unrealistic expectations, as well as from this rigid role and idea of who I thought I needed to be, I have freed up so much energy of mine. And now I am able to even dream in more beautiful, more extraordinary ways with more energy. As I've allowed for this, now that my energy is freed and I don't have to do all of the things. So the last thing that I want to share as part of this conversation is I want to circle back to my fear with the millipedes. And there's aspects and pieces that are not in the book that came later, understandings, other pieces of that story dropping in, other pieces of integration. When I see these creatures, the reaction is not as strong as it was, and yet it is still present. I still have a fear. And for a long time, I looked at this as a failure. I've healed so much. And of course, I take other people through journeys of healing. And there was this part of me that was judging myself around, well, if you haven't healed this, then, who do you think you are? And there was also this part of me that was frustrated with myself. Like, am I ever going to heal this? And that's when I realized I was looking at it wrong. I realized that I had an opportunity to love and accept myself in a way that I had never loved and accepted myself before. I had an opportunity to love myself where I was at, to stop judging myself, stop ridiculing that part of me that had still not somehow integrated or released the fear. I had an opportunity to turn toward her and to just say, you know what? Even if you never let go of this fear, even if you never heal this phobia, even if you always have a reaction, even if you embarrass me because we're out with a group of people and I see a millipede or centipede and freak out, even if all of that, I love you. And that has changed everything. That is where it started. It's almost like now I see that my fear has become this gift to love myself more deeply. So we can all thank the roses for me having the inspiration to share this with you all today. And I guess we can also thank the millipede. Yeah. We will thank the millipede and the rose for inspiring me to share about this circuitous and twisting, ever-evolving journey that, yes, is being brought about and expressed through the imagery of a garden, but as you can see, it's so much more. I hope that in the sharing of this story that you might be able to look at places of where you might be holding yourself in some rigid idea of who you need to be, what that needs to look like. If you don't do that, what that means about you. And just begin to question. That's all. Don't have to heal it. You don't have to resolve it. Just begin to get really curious, because that's where that little thread will begin to show itself, so that then you can slowly pull on it with gentle curiosity and it can start to unravel, just like it did for me. So I would like to leave you with this final excerpt from this book, Initiation, My Fairy Soul Awakening. The lady brushes my head with her glittering hand, and I am filled with light. I suddenly perceive the light in all the crevices of creation, even here in this horrid hole. Remember who you are. Her words comfort me like a song, soothing my soul across the ages of time. I begin to sing. My voice fills the space. The once oppressive shadows submit as sacred tones erupt from a tiny temple within my heart. Like a secret jewel box of earth, air, water, fire, my truth is alive. I can be alive and be at peace, I hear myself say. It is safe to be in my power. The light permeates the darkness of the enclosure, but also the nether regions of my soul. Even the crawling creatures that have haunted me for weeks, for eons, are only light. I see how they have served an age-old soul agreement to carry the memory of this trauma, reminding me of wounds that need to heal. Thank you for your service, I say, acknowledging the part they have played in my story. Even if only for an ephemeral instant in time, I feel love for them. For the first time in weeks, months, years, lifetimes, I feel a glimmering of peace. Thank you so much for joining me for this final story sharing and episode of Season 1 of Elemental Whispers podcast. This has been such an incredible journey. I have loved sharing with you in this way, and I can't wait to see what unfolds for the next season. In the meantime, please know that you can visit me at diamilarose.com and explore all of my offerings and ways in which we can work together. You can also get on my email list and make sure that you stay up to date with all of the happenings and that which is unfolding on this amazing adventure called Life on Earth from Diamira's Corner of the World. Until next time, blessings from the Sacred Heart of New Avalon.